All right. Well, thanks, LinkedIn universe, for joining us today for the first of the RevGenius series on WTF is RevOps. I'm Mollie Bodensteiner. I will be hosting this series moving forward and really excited about it because I'm also curious to learn what the F is RevOps. So today I am joined with Andy, the CEO of Gated. Andy, you want to give a little intro?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, am I the first ever guest on this?
You are number one, and I am so thrilled that it's you because I think this is going to be a great kickoff to the series.
Well, that's awesome. My job is to mix this up a little bit and so I think the title I really geeked out on for sure. I've run RevOps at 3 unicorns. I've done it for about 20 years. In between, I've done startups, and I'm now running a startup that is no longer in RevOps, but tons of RevOps people are using it. So we can talk a little bit about that later. But I learned what RevOps was when the CEO of Upwork asked me to build the first marketing automation system and the first CRM. And I found out I really love the data, the systems, the strategy. And then I sunk Upwork. Actually, it was Elance at the time. They got banned in spam for 30 days. I went out and did a startup, and I came back. I ran all post-sale ops, so CS ops and MOPS at Box, 2 full-time roles, and learned a lot at scale. And then I spent the last 4 years at Culture Amp, running all of RevOps and demand gen, and got to work with a phenomenal team. We took it from like 4 million to 80 million in revenue in 4 years, built a great team, worked with great people, and helped bring better culture to the workforce. So, and I kind of polished that all off with a 6-part RevOps handbook. So I love it. I still advise a lot of people. I help RevOps folks out in their careers. And
it's like you are RevOps, right? Like when I think about thought leadership and RevOps, like definitely think about the work you've done and like how you've advocated in that community. So thrilled to have you here.
Yes, and I have a group of like 10 OG RevOps people. OG ops people, we hate the term RevOps.
I do too. And like maybe we should click into that, right? Like I was going to ask you as one of my questions is like, when did it become RevOps, right? Was there a time that this flipped? Like,
I don't know. And like if you look at Bitcoin, everyone's raising their hands to try to take credit for it. If you look at who named RevOps, nobody's raising their hand. And so if you're the person that coined the term, like come take the credit and the shame as well too. I feel like it was like 3 or 4 years ago, and it's basically, to me, it's a sexier term for sales ops. Here's what I see over and over again. There are tons of people. To me, if you're talking RevOps, you're talking about across the go-to-market function. And otherwise, if you just know sales ops, you're sales ops.
Right.
And so I meet so many people that are sales ops, but call themselves RevOps, but they've never touched the MarTech stack. So you're not RevOps. And so I'm a big believer that it really should be called go-to-market ops. Mm-hmm. And then RevOps is just a sexier name. To me, RevOps is probably CS ops and sales ops together. Like I see that combination a lot where, the person who's doing sales ops can also help with the AM and with renewals. And it's basically all in Salesforce. But MarTech and marketing ops is a very different breed. And I got to experience that when I was, running it at Box, and I ran it at Culture Amp as well too. And so I've kind of given up on trying to train people.
And like when I think about it, I think about, you've got, back to your point, there's the sales, there's the marketing, there's the customer success, but like really there's the finance and like the product operations that truly sit under this, especially when you think about, and like I've always wanted to call it like customer operations, but obviously that term's coined into like a different connotation. But it's like, for me, it's the operations across the customer life cycle, right? Like that's ultimately go to market, if you want to call it that. But you've got to include the product piece in there too, because that still is part of your life cycle.
You do. I think a lot of RevOps teams don't have the sophistication of product data yet. I remember when I showed up at Culture Amp, and they were like, I was like, well, where's your product data and your scoring? And they're like, oh, we don't have it. We can't get it. And I'm like, give me 2 months. So you sit down, you talk about the architecture and the structure, and you map it in, and it works. I guess it's like, I don't know. I mean, you're a deal now. We've geeked out some in the past.
Yeah.
I'm curious how PLG yours is. I think the product and the revenue stuff start to merge more with PLG. I think in the past, there's been like, here's the product. We are selling a 30K plus like, ACV, and they really don't merge. And maybe we need a little bit of product data to do health scores, but that's about it. And
but
so
that's the extent of it. Yeah. I mean, it's like, which is just crazy to me, right? Even if that is what you're doing and you don't have the PLG motion, like you're just leaving so much on the table as you think about where you're taking your customers.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. I mean, we were not a PLG at Culture Amp, but I knew that we could understand risk better and be able to do that. And we learned a lot from Gainsight and how they would do. They were kind of the early innovators in this PLG and product data concept. And then people have taken up the mantle since then.
Yeah. And I always like, not to go off on a tangent here, but I easily could. We talk about like, single view of the customer, right? But if you take that away and stop talking about that and you talk about like, what does your customer expect from you? So like as a consumer, like what do I expect from the vendors I'm doing business with? I expect that they know what I've done in their platform and what I've done in their product and like where I'm struggling and what my last conversation was with support or with the sales rep, right? Like, but specifically like, don't reach out to me about a new feature if I'm already using it or like it doesn't, so like it goes back to customer expectations.
I think that's a really good one. I see one real big weakness for a lot of folks is in call it like the customer marketing based upon product data, that's always like third fiddle, right? Like you probably have revenues, quota, pipeline, all of that working. You hopefully have like CS, and then it's like even harder to like, what's the system you're using to send out like triggered emails off the product that are not, well, you took this action, the product, here's this thing, which is out of SendGrid, but then there's the more of customer marketing at the right times. And those things are oftentimes just brute force bad experiences as well.
But like I've worked for companies that in CRM, you don't actually know who your customer is, right? Like think about like that from an infrastructure standpoint, like especially even when you get into like more of the PLG motions and some of those self signups, like how do you define an active user? How do you flag this? And it goes like back to like the revenue funnel and like really identifying that. And I'm curious, like, who do you think owns that? Like, is that RevOps that you've seen kind of own definition around all of that? Or, where do you see that fitting in?
It depends upon if it's a PLG DNA company or if it's more like a more enterprisey type of sale. I think it's okay if you got that kind of like, you want to break it down and that's part of the job. But in the ways I've generally worked, there's been like a go-to-market world and there's been a product world, and they can talk better and you can get better feedback. But I'm now living in a world where it's everything's in one. And so I believe that if you're in kind of the classic B2B SaaS software type of world, RevOps owns the definition like within the GTM world, and product is there to support that. I think in the PLG world, you have to have a unified definition. And so like the way we've set up our teams is our head of CS is actually like leading our product around customer journey and driving the definitions of those types of things, right? So we're like, we do not do things product and GTM separately. We do them all together. And I think
Amen.
But that's hard. It's really hard. Especially if you join a company that's, so how big is Deal in terms of people? And it's got to be huge now. And so what size?
I think about 1,500 employees now. So, and probably growing. Don't quote me on that.
That was the same size I joined at Box. So in that like 1,000 to 1,500, and things were pretty locked in. Deal's growing a lot faster. And so I think, and we're customers, by the way, it's a great tool. But there's fiefdoms, people that maybe are like, this is the way we do things, even though there could be a better way for the company. They may not get it. Like, this is just the realities of larger corporate stuff. I think I've personally found my favorite is taking a company from like 5 million in revenue up to 100 as fast as you can. Because if you have somebody fast growing, you can things aren't set in stone. And if you've got the right influence, you can do that. At your size, there are things that might be logical, but they could just take too much time to get done.
Yeah, fortunately, we move pretty quick here, but again, quick is relative based on like where you're at as an organization too. So, Aaron.
What's the scope of your team? Like, what roles under you? Do you have data analytics folks as well too? And tell me what's the breadth of your team?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way we're really structured. So I run all of our pipeline operations specifically under the revenue ops. So I've got marketing operations, sales development operations, change management, programs, and then partner operations. And so that's really where my focus is. Then we have a sales operations team, a CS operations team, process and systems, and then we have really tight and enablement. And then we have a really tight knit relationship with the data engineering and data analytics team as well. So while they don't directly report into revenue operations, like very much in toe step together.
I think that's really interesting. So when I started CultureAmp, we were, the big thing I've seen, the change that's coming in, we'll keep using the term RevOps because it's now embedded in all of us, is around data. I think most, like the best example I use is if you want to do pipeline coverage analysis, which I'm sure you're deep into, you
all day long.
You can't really do it out of Salesforce because you don't know what pipeline was entering that last quarter. And so we ended up building the modern data stack that would, pull all the data out, model the data, and then visualize it. And so I think my theory right now is 95% of RevOps teams don't understand that world, and they don't have the budget for data engineers, and they can't get to this better world. And it sounds like, maybe you've got the resources, but it's powerful when you make that jump for sure.
Yeah. And we've talked, this is not only like a deal conversation, but talked to several companies is like, do you put the data engineer in RevOps, right? Does it make sense to have a go-to-market data engineer and data architecture there? Or should that be a centralized function that has been dedicated more of like the analyst supporting from there? So when you think about like that engineering architecture, like should that sit in more centralized as you think about data crossing different departments and teams?
So I went and got 2 data engineers on our team, on our RevOps team at CultureAmp. We worked very closely in partnership. I would say product data teams are always much more sophisticated because they're dealing with larger data. And so we worked in partnership with our product data team and really defined how those things would work. And then eventually we brought the 2 kind of together into one data warehouse. But you need to move fast, right? So if you're having to be asking for what generally will be data engineers sitting on the product team to be able to
we need another table, we need another object, we need,
exactly. And so I what I kind of viewed it as is product, and I know we're going way off topic from this is the stuff that like more mature RevOps teams are definitely dealing with right now. I would say then this is what I did early on at CultureAmp, which was I sat down with the head of the CTO and the head of engineering, and I was like, let's define those interfaces, right? So at Box, we had a common problem we called the multiple EID problem, right? So one Salesforce account could have multiple instances of Box. And so we needed to define those like architecture level things. And then we said, listen, the product metrics you define, but how we map from the product entity to the GTM entity, if we can't agree on that, it's going to be a disaster. And so like in Box, we were literally in a circumstance which is you would put any ID into the Salesforce and you would get that product data. And so what we needed to solve was that problem very early. And once we solved that, we knew how product data and go-to-market data could communicate.
And you knew when you had dependencies, right? Like that's the other thing that I see kind of get misinformed or broken along this is like product makes a change and it's like, oh yeah, how does this translate then into go-to-market?
They needed to understand that mapping was sacred. And then I think the other thing we did was we believed that the mapping of product entities to go-to-market entities needed to be self-serve for the CS teams, right? So we would, when you signed up, you would get that automatically. But if you wanted to include 4 accounts in that product data to be able to look at it holistically, you needed to be able to do that. So that was, maybe not every company deals with that, but we definitely had it at CultureAmp and at Box. And
something similar at Corteva Granular. So definitely can relate to that one. And that was a labor of love based on just really complicated data architecture and schema design. So
that's fascinating. We've dealt with similar problems.
when, like, at what point do you think, so just thinking about like the data engineering piece, right? Like, at what point would you say that a RevOps team should make the decision to bring kind of data engineering in-house? Like, is there like a key thing for like the audience of like, when does it make sense?
Well, I mean, you're obviously going to probably be able to speak to this better than I am, which is Syncari, and
Oh yeah,
you got a lot
big
of
fan.
experience. Yeah. I've never used it, but I'm intrigued. I do believe there is going to be a world soon, and hopefully somebody builds a tool, and I think Syncari may be closer to it than most, where
Yeah.
You don't need data engineers. But right now,
No.
the unfortunate thing is you kind of do.
But you need data acumen and understanding, right? Like, I think that's the big gap is like, it's hard to find people who are like very proficient in SQL and like these different tools, right? You need citizen developers that actually understand architecture and design and like inputs, outputs.
I agree. I mean, and I think you also need RevOps and go-to-market leadership. I think RevOps is there, but you're going to need CRO, CMO, somebody to buy off on this.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what you're doing at the leadership level of RevOps, like, you should not do it. And it could, and people understand the payback period. It took us a year of getting it all in gear, getting it all right, dealing with all the data privacy issues,
Yeah.
getting all the right vendors in place, and getting all the dashboards up. I'm sure, if we had to do it over again, we could do it in 4 or 5 months. But it's so, I think you can get away a long time without it. And then it's more like it's just a maturity in every org. So
yeah, but what's the stopgap you're getting to, like, you're without the investment, right? So like, when you think about this, like, data is such an asset for organizations that like being able to leverage it and use it and like make decisions off of it that don't require an analyst sitting in a spreadsheet for hours and hours building a model that's essentially out of date the second you pull it. Like, what's the cost benefit for an organization?
Yeah, I agree. At the same time, like, I always hear from like end stakeholders, like, I just want to be able to pull all data and analyze all data. I'm like, yeah,
I just want a pivot table.
Yeah, I just want to be able to like just give me the data and I'll figure it out. Like, that's, so I think you need a leader that can guide you through that process. Then you need the technical people. So I think you've got to have somebody that can make a compelling case to executive leadership that like, this is needed and this is what the investment is and this is how we're going to do it. And if you're not growing super fast and you don't have the top of funnel, like, I'd probably spend more money on like driving top of funnel. If you're growing fast, and this is like, how do we make this tweak or this tweak? I mean, the reality is you can download your pipeline at the beginning of every month and you can look back on it. And so I think for us, we were just growing, like doubling every year to tripling every year, and deals in similar circumstance. And so it made sense.
Yeah. And I mean, you think about the data, right? Like, I know this isn't a conversation on data, but one of like the big challenges that I've ran into is like, no one owns it. Right. And like having somebody who really, from a leadership perspective, like is owning and driving like the data authority strategy and like owning kind of that data strategy. Like, I don't know, like, it's hard because I've seen it. I've not actually seen it sit in a single place in an organization where somebody is like really owning it across the business. I don't know if you have any perspective in that, but like getting teams aligned. Yeah.
I sat on the data council at Box and nothing moved anywhere, which was, so I think I believe that you need a forceful personality to drive the change. And, that person needs to be able to work collaboratively and cross-function with different folks. So I would hope that there is a team that owns go-to-market source of truth data and is empowered by all go-to-market leadership and stakeholders to get there. And I hope that then it can work well. And I do envision a world where this is configurable rather than writing SQL code and writing.
It's got to get easier, right? Like, I see it getting easier, right? I do see progress there, but I think some of it goes back to like the ownership and the span of control. And like, I think when you hear RevOps, like, I don't know that that's always synonymous with, what the data needs are going to need to be there too. Potentially, there's pieces from kind of like, again, the sales operations, but it doesn't necessarily mean like, oh man, this team should really have this data at their feet, that doesn't always like click necessarily until you click down a few steps into it.
Yep, I couldn't agree more.
I know Aaron asked a question in chat over here. How do you scale a career in any segment when the new top level role has to oversee all of it? Early stage sales ops becomes RevOps leaders and pull everyone in. Who gets in that role from CS or MOPS? Yeah, and this is, I think, Aaron, and correct me if I'm wrong, like what you're asking here is like when you see really, sales operations leaders moving into kind of like the RevOps leader role versus like the CS or marketing operations people. I hope I'm interpreting in that right.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot, which is a CS ops leader wants to run RevOps one day, and how do they get there? Or a marketing ops leader. I have a lot of those career conversations with people that have worked for me in the past. I mean, I think you have to have a good leader of RevOps that's willing to give you tries in different areas. And when you bring to somebody that's like, hey, I'm really interested in this. And so we would actually do like swapping of people. We're going to take our MOPS person, our SOPS person swap. I was also a big fan of like taking SDRs or deal desk people and making them junior RevOps people because they brought in so much.
There's some of the best analysts coming in, like when they know the business too.
Yeah.
I mean,
I wouldn't like hire somebody. I mean, at Box, I was running CS ops, and I think objectively I was doing well. And then I got a call from the CEO being like, our head of marketing ops quit. I hear you're really good. Can you also take this on? Right. So sometimes it just opens up, and you've got to be willing to put your hand up when those opportunities. And so that opened up a lot for me. I think, at Culture Amp, I was running RevOps and it was working really well, and I was a little bored. So they were having trouble finding a head of demand gen. And I'm like, can I also do that? And so I think you've got to be, you got to be a little proactive with your career. And above all else, it's, as a RevOps person, like, who do you work for? And so if you're the top RevOps person, do you have somebody that'll give you air cover across everything else? If you're mid-level, like, do you have somebody that will really invest in your career? Like I had the best boss I ever had for the last 4 years. And the guy, was great. Like, he gave me the air cover when I needed it. He asked the right questions on data. He knew how to consume it. And he trusted us. And if you don't have something like that, it can be really tough. And so I actually wrote my user manual. It's on my LinkedIn. You can see like, how does Andy tick? And I feel like I would struggle to work for somebody that couldn't write their own user manual and be like, and so I would spend a lot of time picking who I worked for if I want to build a great career in RevOps, is my belief.
No, that's awesome advice. I posted kind of your LinkedIn out there too. Hopefully we can get that to everyone so they can, because you've got great content on your LinkedIn. So highly recommend following you. I think, back to your point, I mean, I'm classic case of a marketing operations person running in RevOps. So I'm very passionate, and I see this a lot, right? Especially when RevOps sits under a CRO, like the natural hiring for a RevOps leader is somebody with a sales operations background. And so some of that is like really, as you look to take a role in revenue operations and leadership, like how you diversify and learn kind of cross-functionally and think around the customer holistically too, is the other big piece too. And like, that to me is worth its weight in gold versus the things that can be taught from like the sales ops perspective or the CS ops perspective if you don't necessarily have that detailed experience.
Yeah, another advice I would have on careers. I was at a LinkedIn RevOps leaders thing. We're going around the table describing our companies, and one guy was like, yeah, and so my company's not growing. And I think I looked at him, I was like, move on, go to a different company, right? Like if your company is not growing, you won't get budget for new systems, team, and it's just more fun when you're growing fast. And that sounds,
it's trial by fire, right? It's how you learn.
Like cheesy advice, and I guess maybe I've been lucky to I've done some startups that haven't grown. But I have, but as I've kind of had those formative roles, I've always been in companies that are growing. I just think it creates opportunities, as we talked about too. Hey, you're doing great as a senior manager in RevOps. It seems like you really think the right way. Would you like to try a director level, or would you like to try senior manager in MOPS? And be like, yes, I'd love to try that.
Right. I mean, I've been with Deal a little over 5 months, and I've ran pipeline and also process and systems, right? So it's about kind of the opportunities that you can create yourself and being okay leaning into those too. Awesome. So I'm going to try to ask a few other questions that I've got on here if you're okay with that. But really, really curious in this is like, what's a misconception that you think a lot of people outside of kind of the revenue ops space have about revenue operations that you'd love to like just clear up if you want to get on a soapbox for a bit?
I guess I would say, I think there are two sides of RevOps. There's the strategy side, and then there's the systems and the data. And I think a lot of stakeholders think it's just the systems and data, and they won't pull you into the right meetings. And I kind of always judge, like, are the people on my RevOps team doing it right if they're getting invited to the offsites of marketing and CS, and are they at the leadership meetings? And so I think maybe the RevOps leader's a dud and it doesn't make sense, but hopefully, like, as a stakeholder of RevOps, you gotta leverage them. Like, don't go and say, here's a tool I want, please implement it, right? Bring them the problem and let them help you find the solution. Help them understand the why, and the answer that will come back will be better.
How do you feel like, I think this is such a like important topic here of like, the seat at the table from like a RevOps perspective versus, obviously RevOps is a support function, right? We are a support function to the organization. We are helping enable, and that is the nature of this. But how do you get that into more of, and again, some of this comes into the leader and the company culture, but like that seat at the table to help influence, help drive, be a part of kind of the go-to-market conversations if you're not there today?
You don't get given a seat at the table. You have to bring data, insights, and strategy. I've got a couple articles on my LinkedIn around like the mentality of RevOps, both for junior folks and for senior folks. But if you aren't making this a strategic function, if you just are saying, what do you need? And I go do it, you don't have a seat at the table. If you're saying,
or if you're just getting told what to do,
or if you're getting told
other conversation.
Yeah. If you're getting told what to do, if you're running the metrics deck in the meeting, and you are bringing data and insights, and you are catalyzing that conversation, you have a seat at the table. Now, what some RevOps teams get stuck in is, I legitimately don't have the resources to do those two things. And so then that comes back to, you need to be able to make a cohesive argument of why. I've always said, like, director level plus can come on in, can break apart the role, can have a strategy for the role, and can make clear and concise arguments for why they need what they need. If you can't do that, probably shouldn't be a director level. If you can do that and people aren't listening to you, probably shouldn't be at that company. Or
it's like, I just want to like amen that, right? Like that.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's like, how do you, it's like, how do you get them to listen, right? Like, so, what makes that right case? And as you're laying that out, and how do you educate stakeholders, right? Because so much of this is, you're going to have stakeholders who are not going to understand the inputs. They're just looking at the outputs. So what's your right communication style that you've seen success with for educating?
Who you work for. You have to be just totally wired into that person. And if you're not, you're just going to struggle. You're going to flail. And so, like, you got to run a good one-on-one with that person. You've got to help them understand, what am I working on? I've got a great article, I think, in terms of like the power of managing up. It's on my LinkedIn, and it's like, if you don't understand that, go figure it out fast, because you could have all the best ideas in your head, but if you're not communicating them the right way, like, they're not listening. And so, fundamentally, I would look to, who do I work for? Are they respected in the org? And can I work well with them? And then it's on me to manage up, right? And it's on them to like, I always look at it as, my job is to amplify the people that work for me. But the return is that they need to manage up and leverage me. And so vice versa, the same way. And so it's like you either know that that's good or not. And I was very lucky for the last 4 years on that.
No, that's awesome. I think that's just, I'm literally writing notes down. So I'm glad I'm learning what the RevOps is during this conversation too. So no, that's awesome. Shane Griffin asked, how large was Gated when you felt like it made sense to hire the 2 data engineers and RevOps?
Oh, we're splitting things.
Oh yeah.
Culture Amp was about 750 people. We hired the data engineers, call about 25 million in ARR. I probably could have pushed it earlier. If you know where you're at. Gated, we are full PLG. We can geek out and talk a little bit more about that since Mollie, I know, knows it. But Gated's full PLG. We have data from the foundational level. We literally have no salespeople. We give it away for free and still make money on it. And so that's a fun, we can wrap with some of the stuff on that. So I believe, it shows that I believe in the power of data, that we needed to do it right here from the beginning.
No, that's awesome. How, maybe let's click into kind of Gated, because I think you've got some really good, obviously a phenomenal experience. So now that you've moved into the CEO role and building the company, would love to learn what your approach was, what are the things that you've taken as you built out kind of this full PLG motion, and taking those lessons from all the other organizations as you brought this together.
Yeah. Maybe I'll take a step back and explain what Gated does, and then we can do it. So I was overloaded with emails running RevOps, and people, as we all know, try to sell us a lot of things. And then when I added demand gen on top, it was even worse. So I wrote an email 3 years ago that said, I don't know you. Here's my Venmo. I like Wounded Warrior. If you donate 10 cents, I guarantee I'll read the email. And people donated, but they donated $20 and $50. And so I built it out and I gave it to all my friends. And, we take off all the email from people you don't know. We put it to a side folder and we challenge them to donate to reach you. If people know you and get that, they can confirm they know you and just bypass. And so we kill the noise in email. We force senders to think deeper. So I'm trying to think the story. I basically I built it and kind of iterated and ran it on the side for a while. And a lot of people in revenue and go to market would say, I love this. Can I get it? And can I give you money? And so I sat down and I thought, can we fundamentally rewire sales and marketing for the better? And I realized there's 10,000 tools helping sellers and marketers pummel buyers, and there's no tools for helping us. And so a guy at Topo said to me, Craig at Topo said,
oh yeah,
I'm talking to Craig today. He's like, holy crap, there's marketing automation. You're building buyer automation. I'm like, yes. So we are building the first tool for users to defend themselves. It's completely free. We have tons of RevOps people, and we're blowing up. I saw some fun tweet the other day of, if you're selling into MarTech, what percentage of your list is already using Gated? And it's getting up there. So RevOps is, obviously I'm RevOps. And so RevOps was my number one persona. They get sold to a lot. So,
all the time.
Yeah. And so Mollie is one I'm working on getting to sign up. But
can you build it for my LinkedIn InMail too?
We get asked every single day, and we will build it there eventually. We promise.
No, that's awesome. It's, trust me, cleaning up the inbox is huge. And so I wrote down buyer automation because I know you and I have talked, but I've never heard you say it that way before. And it's that clicks. How are we run marketing automation, but how are we as consumers managing our pieces here within the business?
Yeah.
Another question that came in too is just, do you think CROs are good bosses for RevOps?
I am a firm believer that the boss that is best is the boss that you can leverage the most. I think a lot of people spend time, should SDRs report to marketing or sales? Who gives a crap? It should be the one that understands how to manage SDRs the best. Should RevOps report to finance, CRO, CMO, chief growth officer, CEO? It really doesn't matter, but you need to report to somebody that gets the function and can leverage. I'm a personal believer that RevOps should have a line to the CEO, but you don't want to report to the CEO.
click into that. Why not? I guess like I'm curious on your perspective on that.
My perspective on that is the CEO has a lot of things on their mind, and you need somebody that. I mean, I've reported off. I'm often have a dotted line, or I'm in the room with the CEO a lot of times. You need to be able to be like having a conversation with them around data. And maybe a small company, they're really spending time on that, or maybe you have a really revenue focused CEO. But you need somebody that when you need something can get into not really deep, but if I'm sitting there explaining to the CEO why we need a data strategy and I need them to buy off on it, like that's not the level that they need to operate at. On the flip side, something I learned last time was I wasn't in the same time zone as the CEO. Our CEO was in Australia, terrific guy, but I was not able to I didn't have his ear as much because we were off by so much.
No, that totally makes sense. And I get it from that perspective. I've been in situations where I've reported to CRO, CEO, kind of across the board in RevOps role, and definitely can empathize with the needing, not the block and tackling, right? But like needing somebody who's going to have those conversations and get deep on kind of what the need is.
Yeah. And it's like, if they have to go too deep, it's a problem, right? Like you should be able to be like, here's what it is. Here's how I'm looking at it. Here's the 2 slides that explain why we need it. People like, okay, I got it. Like my old boss, JD Peterson was, chief growth officer. He ran all of go to market. And, if I needed something from the product team, and I couldn't get it, JD would tag about it. I was in half of the exec meetings anyway. I'm always kind of sitting in on those leadership things, but I'm bringing the data and understanding that stuff. But, you need somebody that can give you that air cover when you're struggling to drive through something. And then say I've got a whole chapter on stakeholders in my go-to-market handbook, which could be a fun one, but there are good stakeholders and there are bad stakeholders. And I don't know about you, but hey, we got a new director of demand gen. I probably need to hug that person, help them understand what our team is capable of, what it's not, and understand how do we work together and get that API working? And then I can move on to the next person. And so I spent a lot of time engaging stakeholders. And once you've got a good one, and I've seen some really good ones, you're like, great, my director level person and this stakeholder, they're working great. I get the regular updates. I get invited to the key strategy sessions, but I know my team is plugged in and wired in, and you hear oh, it's great. This person's super sharp. They're really helpful to me. I couldn't live without them. I'm like, okay, I can go focus somewhere else. Or you hear I'm not getting what I need. Everything's backlogged, You got to go to it. Or you have this person's asking for ridiculous stuff. And you got to go have those chats. So I spent a lot of time thinking through stakeholders, and I felt like it deserved a whole chapter for sure.
Oh, it definitely does. I mean, I think that's just stakeholder management and the fundamentals around that, and how you setting expectations and building relationships with stakeholders is so critical, especially, as we talked about revenue operations, at the beginning. It's not just sales ops. It's, you have various stakeholders and leaders from, the CS perspective, the sales perspective, the marketing perspective, product. You're probably getting some COO in there too, that all think that what they need is the most important. Until you have that go-to-market alignment around them and they're aligned on what the most important is, you're going to get bandwidth gaps because you're going to get pulled in every direction. So how do you actually manage that at more of the leadership level and the alignment of resources and priorities versus kind of every other function kind of screaming down?
Yeah, I think I've got, again, I hate always referencing my articles, but I love to share the wisdom. You as a RevOps person need to be able to force people to make trade-offs.
Yep.
Hey, I need this. Cool, I'll work on it. But you got to be cool, are you okay if that takes priority over this and this is going to impact this thing? If you can't do that, you are going to get mowed down.
Oh yeah. One of the things that I did with my team, specifically at Granular, was every day, it's just put down in Slack. We had a shared channel. It's what are the main things that you're working on today? right? Like get really focused on like, these are your priorities so that when somebody comes and asks you for something, or as me as a leader, if I have to come and ask you for something, I know what I have to be able to trade off really quickly. But you also have it already thought through what you're working on and what your priorities are that you've defined, that you can push back on me and say, what doesn't get done? Like my expectation always for my team is like 1 in, 1 out. So if I'm asking you to do something, I have to cognizantly know something else is not going to get done and be okay making that trade-off. And so being really purposeful of like, this is what I am working on, so that when you have those conversations, you're not flustered and like, oh, where's my to-do list or what am I actually on? And making it very clear that like, here's what you've asked me to do, or here's what I've defined as priorities. Here's what you're now asking from me. What doesn't get done over here? And keeping it really black and white.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I need to be able to do it up, and I need to have those people be able to do it to me as well too.
Yep.
I think I'm probably this person that's going to ask for a ton. And then like, if you just keep throwing things in, which like a lot of revenue leaders are doing, you've got to be able to process and deal with that.
Yep. And if you don't push back, like you don't set the expectation, right? And that tells the stakeholder that you're not at capacity if you're not communicating that. And so like, it's really, my guess is most RevOps people are over capacity 9 times out of 10, probably 10 out of 10. Let's be realistic. So you've got to be able to push back.
RevOps never has enough resources, but if RevOps can't create scarcity, RevOps will not get the resources that it needs.
Right. Do you think I'm gonna like, let's get a little like, I'm not gonna try to be too deep here. Do you think that part of that is like the personalities that sit in RevOps, like the people who are generally drawn to this type of role are like generally maybe more achiever focused people who like to get things done, very like operationally minded, and that's where we like get fulfillment from doing in some regards?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always like to be doing, executing. Yeah. I think it's just a career maturity that at some point you get that lesson of like, managing up is a really important skill. And if you can't do it, like I literally called, I think the article is like one of the biggest unlocks of my career was understanding how to manage up. And so saying, I can't do everything, this is what I can do for you. And here's the trade-offs I'm making, I think is really critical. So I'd say that.
At what point in your career did you perfect that? Or, I mean, maybe it's not perfected yet, but like at what point in your career did you really lean into that? I'm just curious.
It got easier when I had a boss that like, there are certain bosses that are easier and harder to manage up to.
Yeah.
And CEOs and all of that. And so I think it's like, it's hard to learn when you're like always in stress mode. And so I think for me, it became easier when I had those bosses, but ideally you can kind of figure it out together as well. So I'd say, 10, 15 years ago, but then I kind of like refined it in my own head. I wish somebody had like beat me on the head with it earlier, right? Or like come to me and said, hey, here's how you could be more effective.
No, I think that's awesome. Like, I mean, it's something like, I think it takes work, right? Like it's not just a natural instinct too. So like it's a cognizant effort in a lot of situations that has to become then part of habit.
Yes.
No, this is great. I'm like literally again back to like writing down articles I'm going to go back through.
Oh, we're gonna have a lot of fun, Molly. I don't think we haven't spent this much time together.
I know.
I now know how sharp you are as well too. So it's crazy times for sure.
I'm like, if there wasn't an audience listening like this, I mean, just great conversation. Again, hopefully you guys are getting as much value as I personally am out of this. One thing like I'm curious from your perspective as we think about, the future, I'm going to say the future of RevOps, but like, what's one thing like you wish where do you want to grow, right? Like, so thinking about like your development and like where you're trying to continue to improve and like become more of an expert in this kind of space. Like,
I'm learning at a rapid pace right now. Like I'm deeper into the PLG side than I've ever been before. So like I'm currently not in RevOps. Fun thing is we actually had a RevOps user, Evan Pope, who was using Gated, and I opened up the head of CS role. He's like, I want to work for Gated. I love this product so much. And so Evan has been just an amazing hire for us that came from the RevOps. So like we have RevOps DNA.
Yeah.
but we don't sell anything. We make money when we give the product away for free, which is cool. So we take a small percentage of the donation. So I'd say my of like, what do I want to learn may not be as applicable to a RevOps person. I think I found that like you get to kind of VP of RevOps and like it kind of stops, right? Like, where are you going? And so I did a lot of soul searching on that. I think for me, Gated was just the opportunity to solve one of the biggest problems I've seen in revenue, which is prospecting is massively inefficient. And by helping users, I mean, we get chatbotted all the time. We get scored, we get everything else. Marketers do that to us. What if our tool of Gated did that to people trying to sell us lists and things like that? Like, that's the vision I have. And so, you know, what I'm trying to learn is just, I'm trying to build a great company that can shake the foundations of marketing to its core.
No, that's, I mean, which is like, just, I'm still like, it's so cool. I'm just like, so cool, right? Like that's, I mean, I think it's great. You've taken something that like you're obviously really passionate about, that's doing good, right? Like doing good for the world. Not only like the RevOps community, obviously, like selfishly, yeah, I don't want 100 emails a day from SDRs. I love the SDRs, but I mean, I want the personalized one and the people who really are putting the effort behind it and understand the value. And if it requires them to make a donation, they're going to put thought into what they're sending me.
That's what I found is, the reply rate to cold email before is 1.5 to 2%. You don't want to reply because you think that they're going to just keep selling you and all of those things. But when somebody donates $2+ to me, they respect my time. And if and I then in turn reply. So the reply rate for donated emails, 46%.
And you're going to be prepared for that call and that conversation and like that, because you've invested in it.
Bingo. Exactly. It's like it's kind of like the principle in the environment, right? Like it's the public goods problem. And so I think as RevOps people, we're all causing it, right? Like, and I've been the cause of this problem for a long time. I know where to go get the data. I know how to send a lot of emails. I know every hack in the book. And I think we've helped a lot of SDRs. You know, that's an area where I don't know if you get into, but like I've never gotten into the messaging that's going out for all those folks, but like writing great sequences, all that. And so like as RevOps people, we give them the tools, the systems, the data to be able to push a lot of buttons.
But we're not managing the experience is the part that like I'm really trying to like lean into, specifically as I'm overseeing kind of the SDR function from an operations standpoint, is like it goes back to the experience, right? Like it's not just handing it over, it's really helping control the entire outcome.
That's why we love it so much, which is today SDRs send 100 emails and get 2 replies. In a gated world, they send 10 and get 5 replies. Everybody's better off. And that's where we're driving to. Which
is, I mean, again, back to the expectations of the consumer. You know, and so like when you flip the way you look at this, and back to like, again, I'm going to sit on my soapbox of hating the word revenue and revenue operations, right? When you change the narrative and thinking about the experience and the customer and become very customer centric around kind of your operational functions, like that to me is what revenue operations really becomes.
Yeah. I mean, one thing we didn't talk about is RevOps is the glue bringing all these GTM silos together. So marketing sitting over here generating demand. Sales is sitting over here working pipeline. Who's thinking about like the costs all the way through to the conversion, all the way through to how many of those are we getting? Like only RevOps is ever really looking across like, does it all work? Right. So like at Culture Amp, we sat down and we're like, we were running 150 to 180 events a year. Like it was insane. It was a machine. And we got a lot of signups. And we were sending all those to HubSpot and just nurturing the crap out of them. And we kind of were like, what if we only take, we used Mad Kudu, which I'm an investor friend, big fan. What if we only focus on the top 20% and we send those to salespeople and have them work personally? And it worked. And so like you said, we're thinking about the experience, how you use data, how you prioritize.
How you take capacity into this, how you actually, think again, I'm going to say experience, because it again goes back to that experience, not only for your sellers, but also for your buyers. When you put that first, there, which, is huge. And I think about, like taking an organization and like stepping out, like what other role in a company when done well is seeing everything from that perspective, right? Like RevOps is involved, they're involved in product release, they're involved in, pricing and promotion, commissions, demand gen, like every area of the organization, like even IT, right? Like RevOps, IT is generally my best friend most days.
Yeah. Most days.
Is that, yeah, most days, is that cross-functional, right? So like, why wouldn't you want that person in the room, right? So like, as you have strong RevOps leaders who can really, really bring that together, facilitate those conversations, drive that narrative. One of my favorite exercises over my career has been OKR setting. And you see like all the different departments come together and put their OKRs in place. And then you get into a room. And my favorite thing is to just like put them on a slide and then sit back and say like, how does this all work together, right? Like you guys are obviously not communicating and collaborating and aligned. Like we've got to get that alignment. And like really pushing that is like how you build the business the right way and like really get those outcomes that you want and need to.
I agree. Personally, I don't like OKRs because I feel like it's hard to roll them all the way up. So like my least favorite thing is sitting in lots and lots of art. Okay. I've never been in a company that we've made OKRs work, but I believe in the principle, right? Like,
the planning, right? You have to have something that you're holding yourself accountable to, right? And measuring against, and like, kind of like, what are you trying to achieve? Whether that's OKRs, whether that's goals, whatever you want to call them, like you need to make sure, for me, it's like, you need to have something that you're quantifying and like working towards that ties into the company's strategy, and like very, very clear about that. I like to have a scorecard for performance, just my own personal, that I'm measuring against. So I make sure like I'm making progress on my goals.
I like it. I kind of broke it down into like in my handbook, kind of the 5 big buckets. And then I always look at like, are we looking good on each of those, right? Like, do we have a coordinated strategy for systems? Do we have the right data that can help us answer it? Like, do we have good partnerships with stakeholders? Do we have the capacity to do our job? And then like, are we training the teams on what we're doing really well? And like, if you have those things, I feel like then RevOps is fun and easy. But it's kind of a fun question for you, which is like the scale you're at, the scale I've operated at, like takes a lot out of you. It takes a lot of energy too, right? It's in, I'm loving maybe not having to deal with all those random stakeholders and everything, and really focusing and rolling up.
Do you miss the firefighting? Is that what I hear? No, I'm just kidding.
Firefighting, I always have the teams, but I miss I don't know. It's like, it's very draining to do it at the scale that you're doing it and I've done it at. It's emotionally, like, it pays well. But it's very draining. And so I'm kind of really enjoying what I'm doing now. And obviously you're there now, so you can't say you're super drained, but it's, I find there's like this 6 to 9 month high where you're driving the impact, and then you got to take a step back and be like, like, how do I make this the long marathon instead?
Yeah. And how do you, because it's iterative too, right? So like especially when you get in and like you are behind the 8 ball of like when an operations function really needed to exist, you're playing catch up. And that is that, 6 to 9 months is getting that foundation, getting the standard operating procedures, getting just the ship, the ship sailing. And then you've got to start navigating, like, how do we get it in the right direction? And like ship analogy is not going to work for me here, but
keep going with it.
I don't know. I'm
putting
like
up the sails, all that.
We've been watching a lot of like Pirates of the Caribbean lately. But like, how do you get it to the next phase of it, right? So like everyone wants to be 10 steps ahead of where they are today, but without having like the foundation and the stuff that's like the really critical work, you can't get there. And so like you've got to grind on that. And that's probably that high and that exhaustion that you're talking about. It's like the just running and getting it there. And then it's like, okay, now when you get there, like you want to be able to rest, but now you've got to iterate it and take it to the next level. I know that we've got 5 minutes left and there's a few questions here, so I want to call those out.
Perfect. And if it's okay, I may need to wrap like 2 minutes.
No worries. So personally had issues wrapping my head around not only multiple systems, but systems requiring dev help, like internal ones that require APIs. How do you manage multiple systems, both declarative and programmatic, without feeling overwhelmed?
Get a systems person. It's I haven't had my hands deep in systems in a while, but I understand the architecture on them. I was just on the phone with the CEO of Sweep this morning, right? Like they're doing really interesting things. Molly, I'm curious if you poked around with that. But there's increasingly tool sets built for RevOps people.
Yep. I mean, that's citizen development, right? Like, how do you get to the point that you can take, Siguri's great example of this. Like, how do you take and build those integrations in a way that you can have somebody who understands enough about the architecture, the design, the inputs and the outputs that you need, right? Because to me, that's the most important piece is like, are you building something that's getting you what you need from this in a scalable way and thinking through that without actually needing to know kind of the minutia of the technology behind that from a front end perspective. And, part of it is like making sure you can advocate for the resources that you need too. If you don't have kind of the development role within the revenue operations perspective, team, like how do you communicate that up? How do you identify, if this is a business piece, we either outsource it or we find somebody internally who can get the bandwidth and get the ability to come and help support this. And then, last question, I think from Ashley here, what have you done since coming to Gated that's been most impactful on like RevOps in your opinion?
I love helping people with their RevOps careers. I've got kind of like a secret database of people looking and companies trying to hire. If you're in RevOps, drop me a LinkedIn, put a message. I'm happy to just connect and help you in your career. And I'm helping behind this, like my day job is building Gated to save all of you from your email. But behind the scenes, I definitely help out some CEOs that are building like tools to make RevOps better as well too.
Love that. Any final words of wisdom, anything, you'd like to add to this conversation? Really appreciate your time today. I feel like I personally just learned a lot.
Go save your email. Sign up. It's free. If anyone wants to email me to andy@gated.com, you get to experience Gated and you can donate to reach me. I guarantee a reply if you donate the $2.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Andy. Really, really appreciate it.
I feel like I got to know you a lot better, Molly. This is great. We'll chat again soon.
Yeah, take care. Bye, everyone.